In the last video, we have seen how to use list interface and array list class. In fact, you can also define here directly a array list, which will mean the same thing. It's because list is an interface array list to the class which implements list, right? So you can simply define array list here. But just for the example, we are going for the list here. Now, if you can see, when you talk about this collection framework or collection, it's a replacement or it's a upgradation of your arrays, right? Now, if you talk about array says it's a collection of similar type of elements. But what about list? List is a collection of objects. Now, that object can be of any type. It can be an integer, it can be a string, it can be a float value. Now the first element in this list is 4, right? So initially it doesn't know what are the elements it will have. Like it will have integer elements, it will have a float elements. So when you say 4, okay, it will say 4 seems like integer, but what I will do is I will store that data in object format. So you can see they have also mentioned it's an object format. What about this 2? It's also an object here. That means instead of saving this 2 in this format, we can also save this 2 in this format, which is not number. So this 4 is a number here, and this 2 is a string. We can also save 8.0, which is not an integer, it's a float, right? So the problem is, in this list, I can have any type of element. But I don't want that. I want the list should have only integers. But you can see we are not getting any error. And here, instead of using this object, I want to use integer, which means all the elements are of type integer type. But unfortunately, we are using a list which has a collection of objects. Now, in order to use a list which will only have integers, you can use a concept called as generics. Now, what is generics? Generics is a concept introduced in Java 1.5 in which you can specify the collection so that the collection will have only those type of elements. Now what I mean by that is, so after list, just give this angular brackets. Now why angular brackets is because no other bracket is remaining. You know, round bracket is used by methods, curly braces is used by block, then we have square bracket is used by arrays. So the only bracket remaining was this angular brackets, and that's why sometimes it is called as tag format. These generics are of tag formats. So we have to use angular bracket and say, I want only integer elements. So integer is a class in Java or a wrapper class. So instead of using a int primitive variable, we should be using integer. And this side also we can use something called as integer. Now you can see for this line, we don't have any warning. I guess this is the last. Yeah, so we don't have any warning. Let me just save this to remove that warning. So we don't have warning here. We don't have warning here. The problem comes in these 2 lines. It says the collection is of type integer. You cannot have a string value. So we have to specify 2 here. And they are gone. Same goes here. Instead of saying a float weight value or double value, we have to specify it's a int value. So we have to say 8. Now since your collection is of integer type, we don't have to write object. We can simply say it's an integer. See, we are adding elements which are primitive values, which are primitive int values, right? But it is automatically get converted into integer type because of the concept of auto boxing. So in Java, we have a concept of auto boxing which converts your primitive int values to integer object. Okay. Now if you run this, you will get all the integer values. Simple. So this is how we should be using a collection with a generics. Now in Java 1.7, what they say, when you define the type of your elements in the declaration or in the reference type, why we need to specify when you create the object? So you can simply use an angular bracket just to define that I'm using a collection. Okay, we need to change this to 1.7. Okay, so you have to specify we are using a collection, and in this we have to use this angular bracket to specify I'm using a generic. So you need to specify integer there. And if you still run this code, the output will be same. So this is how we need to use a list interface and a generic and array list. Now this generic can be any type. It can be integer type, it can be float type, it can be character type.